All right. Thank you, Kirsten. Good morning, everyone. Jim Kovach here along with Joe Brown. I'd like to thank ATARC folks for putting all this together. I know it's a monumental task, and I think as Jerry mentioned a week or so ago, you all have day jobs. So appreciate your extra effort and the spirit of collaboration. I think this is a great initiative that ATARC has taken on, and I think it'll contribute to a broader understanding and collaboration across the community. So appreciate the opportunity. So for us, with respect to Zimperium, we'll do a few minutes on our alignment to zero trust. I'll offer a little bit of an overview, and then we'll dive right into the lab demonstrations themselves. My portion will probably be about 15 minutes. If you have the outline, but are not familiar with the use cases, I'll do a little spoiler alert there. We're going to focus on use case 4 and 5, which is primarily GFE and BYO. And then scenarios 1, 2, and then really more on the other scenarios which involve threats, specifically phishing, sideloading, malicious profiles, and person in the middle type attacks. And I think we'll do Q&A, and Kirsten, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're gonna leave that open and then just answer what we can. Is that right? Is that how we were gonna approach Q&A?
You got it.
Okay, great. And then any questions at the end in terms of folks who want to see a little bit more of the lab environment, if you will, or participate in it. All right, so a little bit of context. I think most folks are familiar with zero trust across the board. For our perspective, although we do touch on each one of the pillars in various aspects of what we offer, our focus is primarily going to be on the device. In the spirit of that is to satisfy the visibility task or gap, if you will, that's largely now being promoted by the POTUS executive order, of course. Got to get more visibility across the network, including all endpoints, such as mobile, phone, tablet, etc. Just saw the OMB 2101 that just came out recently that talks to EDR, which includes the mobile endpoints. So our alignment with that is largely around what we refer to as device attestation. So if Jerry actually joined, I'll pick on Jerry a little bit. It's great that we can use ICAM technologies or other approaches for identity validation to make sure we know Jerry is Jerry. But if Jerry doesn't know, and we don't look at his device to make sure that he's not carrying a malicious payload, he can bring that right into the organization inadvertently, or perhaps if Jerry's having a bad day and wants to do something, maybe he does it intentionally. The point is the identity as well as the device kind of go hand in hand in terms of making sure that there's integrity there and that the device is sound and free of malicious malware or harmful applications. The other notion that I'll kind of point out there, and we'll talk through this in the presentation and certainly in the demos, is getting a little bit of advancement, quite frankly, away from just relying on signature-based technology. Some folks might argue it's legacy at this point. We should not be dependent fully on signatures and start to look at zero-day attacks. They're prevalent, they're getting more and more sophisticated. And quite frankly, they're probably going to ramp up going forward. And I'll talk about that here in a quick second. But in line with that, employing machine learning technologies to ensure that the zero-day is addressed. So that's some fundamental concepts that I'd like you to kind of keep in your mind as we step through some of this. Okay, so what problem do we solve? Here's a little exercise or test for you. Go ahead and take your GFE or your personal device, put that in another room, walk away from it, see how long you can go without feeling anxiety to try to go and get it and check on them. Mobile devices are in our daily life. For the most part, they're the vast majority of the devices that do in fact connect to infrastructure or where you perform some type of work. Whether we admit it or not, we have work on our personal devices. Whether it's sanctioned or not, we have work on our personal devices in some form or fashion. So it's that gap of the devices that we at Zimperium focus on. We're all about securing mobile, and that's our focus. If you look at your mobile device, you could look at it and think, how can this thing possibly harm me in any way, shape, or form? Well, there's four primary threat vectors that we'll talk about. Phishing is one that's not shown on the screen here. But if you look at the device type threats exist. These are things such as rooting the device, jailbreak. We'll talk about that in a minute. Network threats, this is you sitting in a Starbucks connecting to what you think is a safe Wi-Fi and it's actually not. And then applications, what you might think are benign applications, games, TikTok, for example, but you have no real appreciation for some of the risks that go alongside some of those applications, let alone the malicious ones that are out there. So why now? The threat continues. This is an impossible slide for me to keep current because they just keep coming in terms of headlines. Of course, Checkmate has been out there for quite some time with the exploit Check Rain. If you're not familiar with that one, if you have an iPhone 10 or earlier, you have it. It is a hardware-based vulnerability. You can't update, you cannot patch. You basically have to go buy a new phone, which is a fantastic business model, but kind of sucks for the rest of us. At any rate, these types of vulnerabilities that exist, they proliferate. The most terrifying recently one, probably, at least for me, is Pegasus. Having something being able to take control of your device, your camera, your microphone, your private text messages, your private photos, all your emails, etc. Basically own your device. To me, that's pretty terrifying. So again, 0 day, 0 click. There was a time where you had to take action before something bad would happen. You had to click on a link, for example. Well, now you don't. Now there are 0 click threats that are emerging out there, and it's pretty significant. So if the threat is not a time to act, I think now at least maybe there's some mandates that are out there that help agencies start to get some wood behind the arrow, if you will. 2101, again, I mentioned earlier about EDR capabilities. A month or so ago, 2131 came out with respect to logging capabilities and what should be logged across all the various devices. You'll see mobile threat defense represented in page 35 to 38, I believe, on memo 2131. It's also already been in the fiscal year 2021 FISMA reporting requirements. So if you're not familiar with that, you can see it's embedded in there primarily, again, for GFE and BYOD devices. And then additionally, there's been some recent updates and guidance from NIST with respect to broader mobile security in 800-124 Rev 2. And then when it comes to BYOD, the Special Pub 1800-22 recently came out as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about why those are significant. So how do we solve it? So if we look at the capability that Zimperium brings, it's an app on your phone. It addresses those 4 primary threat vectors. It also looks at the applications to make sure, again, that what you think is a benign or a very friendly application is not actually ciphering off your PII somewhere that you don't want it to go, or potentially sideloading some malicious behavior, again, that you would have no way of knowing about. So that kind of is how it looks. It's a clean visual. It's by design, so it doesn't become overwhelming to the end user. And it provides a whole host of capability. If we unpack that for just a minute, the first thing we do when we deploy is we do an inventory of your device just to make sure you're not compromised in any way, shape, or form. And this gets back to the device attestation part of Zero Trust. Again, if you want to declare Zero Trust, you have to look at both the identity as well as the device. Otherwise, it's a little bit difficult to say, hey, I've got Zero Trust, I'm good to go, if I have not performed that inventory. Then the next thing we do is we go into instantaneous or immediate monitoring, detecting for those threats, again, protecting you from 0 days. If an event were to occur, we can take immediate action in a whole host of ways. We'll get to that in demonstration. We can leverage some organic remediation capabilities, or oftentimes what we do is we leverage remediation capabilities as part of the MDM that you probably have. And then lastly, and this is where I think a lot of executives and CISOs and certainly folks in SOCs and whatnot can appreciate, is all the digital forensics and analytics that are produced as part of protecting your device. Ultimately, it gives you some real-time decision-making capability on the overall security posture of your mobile environment. Separately from the device side, there's also The back end in terms of developing mobile applications, it's inherently different than developing server side or traditional web applications. There's a whole host of things that you have to account for in mobile that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily in traditional web app development. And for those organizations that are developing mobile applications, there's a number of capabilities that you should explore. There's some great scanning technologies out there. We have one, of course, but obviously the folks at Now Secure and CryptoWire have phenomenal capability. But there's also some additional things in terms of code tampering and code obfuscation and protecting the actual encryption, which, believe it or not, is not a given thing, interestingly enough. And then there's also runtime protection in terms of the app that you build in the event that you don't control the device in any way, shape, or form. You can persist protection in the actual application itself. So there's some great capabilities there in terms of what we refer to as the mobile DevSecOps, if you will, or DevSecOps for mobile. Why are we unique? So a couple of things. I would say there's actually a number of distinctions or differentiators. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I see a hand up from Greg. Hey, Greg, did you have a question? You'd have to come off mute, though.
Yeah. What about device attestation to verify that the device that you're monitoring is the actual device that is supposed to be monitored, and they haven't swapped out a personal device for a GFE? I mean, they swapped out a GFE for a personal device. How do you actually ensure that you're on the correct device? Basically, device characteristics is something you can pull to actually verify that it is the device intended to be monitored.
That's correct. I think you kind of more or less answered your own question, but that's done through the provisioning process. And Joe, I'll ask you to comment perhaps maybe in the lab demonstration as we begin to show that, but it's basically during the onboarding or the provisioning process is where that occurs.
Okay, I'll hold until then.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was starting to say, there's many different distinguishing and differentiator capabilities. A lot of it is in our Z console. A lot of it is for admins that basically make their day go a lot easier in terms of the robustness of the actual console. So we'll talk to some of that and show some of that in the demo portion. But at a little bit higher level, the main difference is our patented Z9 detection engine. This is the on-device capability and the zero-day detection capability. So fundamentally, we chose to design our architecture and our engineering and our whole design parameter around the notion that we can't always guarantee a persistent comms connection to the internet. We don't want to depend on just signatures. So again, we have developed this over an extensive period of time. It's continuously refined, but a machine learning algorithm to detect and identify what does normal look like with a high degree of confidence. And the moment that normal is even slightly not normal anymore, we're going to trigger and we'll characterize it as critical or maybe not so critical in other fashions, but we're going to detect those anomalies, if you will, through our behavioral analysis engine. This is, I think, largely supported. If you look at the recent reference architecture for BYOD, if you look there on the middle bottom portion of the screen, outlined in red is the on-device capability. So again, we contend the best, obviously any protection is good, of course, but we would contend that the best protection is done on device. There's also other things about not passing data up to the cloud. Everything stays on the device, which is, there's a number of benefits there. And then almost lastly here, a couple more slides just to give you some further context. We recognize the government is heterogeneous, will always be heterogeneous from agency to agencies, different investments, different capabilities, different mission sets that require them to be heterogeneous, if you will. So we try to offer the most future-proof capability that's out there in terms of the larger ecosystem. So today you might want to deploy on-prem. That's generally not the trend anymore, but there are some reasons to do so. And we can support deploying on premises. You might want to deploy FedRAMP that's totally fine. We run the AWS Gov Cloud, so you can deploy FedRAMP. If you want to run in Azure or Oracle, for example, by all means, it's your choice. So we try to remain as agnostic as possible and as flexible as possible. That includes as well integrations to all the various technologies that you probably have on the right-hand side in various flavors or fashions. And we leverage our integration and our capability with all of them equally. So again, to the extent that you can have the most future-proof MTD system that you could possibly have, that's kind of what our principle is. And two more slides. Lastly, this is it, right? This is the visibility that I spoke of at the very beginning, where again, you can't protect what you can't see. So the degree and fidelity of the forensics that we deliver allow CISOs and security professionals and cyber professionals to really truly get a sense of what's happening on their mobile infrastructure, such that they can make decisions. If if they've got resources deployed in an OCONUS area where those devices are not up to date, some of them might be jailbroken, you would be surprised as to what we can collect off of our telemetry that affords you the ability to make very, very sound decisions about your security mobile enterprise. Again, I'm not going to read all of these, but in this particular case, this is a representative customer of ours. 242 devices with malicious apps, including the Tutu app. Not really sure what the Tutu app is, but it strikes me as probably shouldn't be on your device. 86 devices were jailbroken. 4 were connected to known rogue access points, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole host of fidelity. This is also backed up with some very, very detailed reporting. At a little bit of higher level, for CISOs or CIOs, if you want to just kind of get a larger snapshot, we certainly support executive reporting as well. Again, give you maybe a little bit of a scorecard in terms of how you're comparative to perhaps some of your peer agencies or peer industries, if you will. So tremendous forensics, high fidelity, great visibility, all go towards the value that mobile threat defense brings to you. So I'll pause there. I'll have Joe start to kind of queue up the lab there. But if there are any other questions, Greg, aside from yours, we'll get to in the lab demonstrations. I'm happy to take them now, or I'm sure we'll find time at the end. All right, awesome. I'll stop sharing.
I've got a question. Sorry, I was wrestling with the mute button. Does Zimperium do any continuous authentication, maybe like behavioral biometrics or something?
So I believe our authentication is done through perhaps an identity management provider of sorts. Again, whether it's leveraging a CAC or PIV or Ping Identity, we have an integration with as well out of the box, if you will. And I believe that's facilitated, but I'll defer that to Joe.
Actually, I have that one queued up. That's going to be our, let's see, that's going to be our third video, I think, that we're going to look at.
Okay, perfect. So if you, was that Peter?
Yeah, that was me.
Awesome, Peter. So we'll make sure we cover that. So I'm sorry, I have just 2 setup slides in terms of the demos itself. So we're going to focus on use case 4 and 5. And it's basically managed device, not managed device, but largely the premise is the same. So we'll talk through those use cases, and then scenarios 1, 2, and then, as I said, the threats and mitigations. Personally owned device, kind of changing location. Maybe there are CONUS today, OCONUS tomorrow. So we'll talk through how that works. And then GFE, where there's a combination of work being done and then maybe a little bit of personal usage to check bank account or what have you. So those are the day-to-day, I think, the real world scenarios, quite frankly. I think we all do this. So those are the applicable scenarios for us that we'll get into, and then we'll show the threats. All right, let me stop sharing.
And cue me now. Let's get the right desktop. We'll share it, and then just a quick hurrah from somebody when they can validate it.
Looks good.
Excellent.
You're good.
Okay. So what I'm going to set up right now is just this scenario of, and this particular video, by the way, I'm going to not play it, but I'm going to kind of manually scroll through it so I can have some dialogue as to what you're going to see. And I must admit, I had a lot of fun making this. Never mind the date and time that you see on that phone. It was a short night, but with the miracle of coffee, I think we're going to be in good shape here. As I go through here, I'd kind of like to set things up, what we're going to be talking about, our scenario here. We'll start off with scenario 1 on use case 5. This is our personally owned device, with no mobile device management, sponsored on it, and there's nothing dropped on it. And we're going to attack an iOS device. Now, I get an odd delight out of referencing the disastig for 14 and the stuff that came right out after that, all the 0 days and then 15 and what have you. So again, that's kind of a sick delight, but it is something that we all need to keep in mind. The whole point behind that was that, here's a condition that you can put using MDM. That was a critical part of it to help mitigate, any sort of issues. And then right after that came out, we understood that, MTD, or mobile threat defense, was really the missing part in that. So with that, what we're going to do is we have our user, and this particular user, just for everybody who hasn't had a chance to kind of scan over it, they travel quite a bit, doing a lot of personal travel. And when we do that, this person accesses a corporate or an organizational and agency, either application, be it on the device or through a web portal. And that's that's what we're going to take into consideration right now, that this individual does a web portal. Now, with that, on occasion, they need to do some administrative work, some service work and what have you. So they will switch users or switch the context, or they'll have to elevate their privileges to do system maintenance. Now, in this case, this individual user can be out in a cyber cafe. It doesn't matter if it's in Alabama or if it's in Algeria or wherever they happen to be. We'll see about why that makes a difference a little bit later whenever we get to the console. But what I have up here, and on the left, we've got our victim, our friend's phone. We'll make him or her a victim in a few minutes. And to the right, you're going to notice a Kali Linux instance. It's very specific to this kind of attack. And what we're going to do for this guy is we are going to do that top attack, where we're going to put out a new malicious, call it a person in the middle type of attack over a rogue Wi-Fi that we're going to set up. And again, I had a little fun with the name. If you do have any cybersecurity folks out there that's been around a while, I want you to pay attention to the second SSID that I connect to. Now, in the case of the attack, how we progress it, understand that most of these attacks are highly researched up front by our threat actors. So they've done their reconnaissance. They know that this person is already in the area of operations, and they've done a little recon as to where they're going to be. This isn't just a target of opportunity in this case. These are very targeted attacks, at least especially on this one. So let's get started on this. Our friend here is going to make a connection to something called free Wi-Fi. And as we go along, I'm going to turn the volume down here because it's just me making little comments. All right, so as we go along, I want to show you a couple things. One is right up here, you'll notice that I am attached to free Wi-Fi. This is my point. This is how I'm getting out from the cyber cafe. And when I said that I had a little fun with it, if you keep a look at those last 4 letters, if you got a cybersecurity background and you've been around a while, that may look familiar. Again, I had a little fun with it just for our sake and to bring a little levity to it. But initially, what a true attacker would do is they would spoof this SSID, and we'll see that a little bit later in another video. But they would spoof this ID, and then for instance, they'd be using a Wi-Fi pineapple or some other device to increase their power, which would make the device go, well, it's got a little bit more of a signal than my legitimate one, and it would move over to the more powerful SSID, or the more powerful access point, just to keep a good quality signal. Now let's get started on that. So our user, again, is going to make connections outbound. They're going to want to go to their to their portal. Now, when they do this, I want to show you that first of all, I do have a live connection. Again, this was last night, and as I went to apple.com, if I had a little extra cash, I may be interested in the iPhone 13 Pro. Or if I click on buy, I might find out that it's going to probably cost a little bit more than a little extra cash. In fact, it's going to be a lot. Another thing that I wanted to show is that, again, I'm going from site to site here, and I'm unencumbered. Now, pointing out some scores last night on the football side on the left for the OCONUS folks, and then a football side on the right for the CONUS folks. Now, as I go along, I'm going to go and my actor is going to take a little activity here. I'm changing a little bit of my exposure here so you can see it appropriately. And when we say device attestation, this is before we've made that connection to the bad guy's access point. And you'll see here, this is just an overview. There's no threats detected. The device safety, this includes the version of iOS. Is it the latest? Does it have any vulnerabilities pinned against it? Any CVEs? Is the network good? In this case, it's got a WPA key on it, so it's encrypted. And then the apps that are on it, they're all legitimate applications. All right, so our friend here is going to get to work, and when they do, I'm going to notice this as an attacker. So if you look over to the right, we'll pivot over to my attack box. Now, I'm going to create a Wi-Fi access point called Cafe XAKEP, or hacker, spoiler. And when I do that, what I've done is I've pushed in this case, it would be the same SSID, but I pushed a higher output signal, and then I made my target's device automatically pivot over there. The very moment that I did that, a couple things happened. Look at the device over here, or my attack box. I've got my good guy, or my victim right here. Now, again, whenever I made that connection, you'll notice that my first drop down comes down and it says, hey, this is an unsecured Wi-Fi network. That means there's no web key, there's no WPA key. That's not necessarily a high risk thing, but we're going to get some activity here. All right, so as I make my connection, I'm going to fire up my browser. I'm going to fire up the Zips thing, or the Zips app. And I want to point out a couple things. First, there's that unsecured Wi-Fi network. The second one is something we call a danger zone. That means that when we evaluated this particular SSID or access point, we also have seen malicious activity in the past. That puts it in something called a danger zone. Then, and these three things happened in sequence, boom, 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 within milliseconds. And then the third activity here, or the third event here, is we've identified this as actually a rogue Wi-Fi access point. Now, as we go along, and this is all based off of policy that's pushed the device through the console based off of your needs, a couple things to note. We can alert, or we can keep these alerts off of the screen, depending on severity in our policy, the user screen, just to make sure that there's no interruptions of their workflow. Additionally, I've got my policy here set as monitor only. each one of these events, I can tag certain activities, such as, if it's an unsecure Wi-Fi, I can enforce the device to instantiate, for instance, a VPN. That way, I can mitigate some of my risk profile there. Same thing with danger zone. When it comes to something more severe, like a known rogue Wi-Fi or something that we can identify on the fly as a rogue Wi-Fi, I can take actions like disable Wi-Fi or encrypt any sort of traffic that's going out, tunnel the traffic that's going out. The best case in this point would definitely be to drop Wi-Fi or drop this particular connection. Let's continue on. So I point that out there, and then I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to get to work. So in this case, I'm going to come back over to my device or my attack, and I'm going to select my victim. And there's going to be a couple things that are going to happen. I want to point this out right here. So in the case of my attack box, it's pre-configured with go.com. I mentioned the recon up front. Our friend here, our victim in this case, they typically go to something like appportal.agency.gov. Now, that's going to be the portal for their organizational apps, and this is where this individual would make their normal use cases, and then if they needed to escalate their privileges and what have you, they would do so through the web portal. Now, if you recall, I am doing a person in the middle attack, which means I can not only redirect traffic, but I can also sniff the traffic that's going through. The fact that I am on an unencrypted Wi-Fi would make that essentially easy with EtherCap or any of those tools that you'd find in just about any sort of penetration environment, not unlike Kali. All right, so in this case, like I mentioned, they would be going to agency.gov. Let's continue on. So our friend over here on the phone, and remember, this is an iPhone, they'll make their visit, and instead of Disney going to go, this is what the portal would be, but my attacker has injected a pop-up. Now, in most cases, as Jen mentioned before, that even in a normal attack, we need to entice our user to take some sort of an action, be it click on a link through a phishing a URL, and our phishing detection is not just web sourced or email sourced. It could come over from SMS, it could come over from WhatsApp or any of those mechanisms. But in this case, the pop-up came from visiting go.com. And for our discussion here, this would be appportal.agency.gov. So in this case, you need to, your network profile, we want to drop this on you to make sure that you're not exposed organizationally. We're not exposed either organizationally to any sort of malicious activity, which is exactly what we want this person to think. Now, very dutifully, our victim, let me put that back over here. There we go. Our victim is going to install this. Now, as they go through and install it, there may be a couple more drop downs that they will very dutifully ignore, but let's go ahead and get that installed. The second they do that, it's installed this this particular application profile, connectivity profile. Now, why are they doing that? From an attacker's perspective, this will allow them, and in this case, it's going to drop a malicious certificate, or actually a signed certificate that will allow them to make HTTPS connections wherever they wish. And that's going to be handy for things like data exfiltration. If I drop an app, and we'll see that a little bit later in another video. If I want to drop an app, I want to tunnel that traffic out, and I can use a local certificate to do that. Same thing if I want to instantiate a reverse shell, which we can do on these devices. Now, as we do that, we'll go through I need to put in my code, and then you can see right over here that my certificate has been put in. I still need to install it and trust it, but you'll notice that it is an SSL certificate. So at the end of this, I have installed my malicious app. I'm sorry, my malicious profile. Now, up to this point, we've had the alerts come down, including one that would mention the app itself. I'm sorry, the profile itself. But the fun stuff is actually going to be seen in the console. We'll get to that momentarily. All right. So that's going to be our first condition, our first video here. I'm going to get rid of him, and we're going to bring into the second situation. Now, our second situation is going to be around scenario 2 and use case 4. So let me bring that guy up. Let's see, it's going to be him. All right, we'll make this all nice and full screen looking so we can see it. Now, this is the same scenario, but you'll notice a couple things. I'm going to, in this case, attack an Android device. I'm going to tell you up front what kind of device this is, and I think the majority of the government folks will kind of get a little bit of a pucker factor 5. This is a Huawei 6P, Nexus 6P made by Huawei. So we'll have fun with that as well. Now, in this scenario, just to refresh, this is a government furnished device. Not that it would be Huawei, but that's what I have. And it's also under the control of a mobile device management, or MDM. And we're going to see some activity here as well. I'm going to drop to another video where we're going to take a look at some device attestation and conditional access around that controlled by the MDM. But let's get started. Now, this agency employee is working from satellite office. And, you know, if it's in a large office building, sometimes down at the very bottom of the, you know, on the entry floor, there's a coffee shop or a meeting area or what have you. And we're going to start off with understanding how this individual uses their GFE. And as was mentioned before, Jim had kind of toyed with this a little bit, is that this particular person is permitted to go to things like banking sites, you know, limited personal use, and maybe even visit Disney for anything. And we'll take a look at that. Now, you'll notice my attack box is exactly the same. In fact, this was done a little bit before our previous one. And what we're going to do here is we're going to actually do a full exploit on this device. So we're going to get root on him on this device here. What's going to be fun is when we get to the forensics in that and take a look at exactly what's pulled off on here. Now, that could be things like geolocation, sideloading apps, any phishing activity that's taking place. Let's get started. So again, we're going to go through the same scenario for connectivity. You see that I'm connected to Wi-Fi, the same one in this case, just for convenience sake. And I'm going to fire at my attack box just like I did before. So my rogue Wi-Fi has been put in place. And in this case, I'm going to connect to it. Now, whenever I do that, I'm going to point this guy out right here. So this is my original connection, free Wi-Fi. This is going to be anything that you could put in there, corporate one or Federal Bureau of Agency, redundancy agencies, you know, whatever you need to have on there. But you'll also notice this free Wi-Fi too. That's my bad guy over here. Now, very innocuous. So we will, we'll go ahead and make that connection. And again, it'll be the same scenario to drive them over, amp up the output of that access point, more to the point, my person in the middle attack. Let's get started a little bit more. So as I go out, I make that connection, and just like before, all I had to do, by the way, was make that connection. You see that I get that same thing. It's a danger zone. And any of those alerts, I can take an action, either user-driven or be it automated. Now, as I continue with my attack, I want you to see this over here. DNS spoof enabled, so that way if I'm enticing the user to visit a particular site, I'm going to have control over where they go just by a simple DNS response. So as we progress, again, I have the danger zone. Now, this one I've enabled the user to take action. But this particular user has not been through the mandatory security training and security awareness. So, and they've got some work to get done. The SSID looked completely innocuous, not an issue. We're going to continue by simply ignoring this particular event. Now, ignore, and then we get the red one. Again, that access point has been identified as a rogue access point. Now, the way this particular one was identified is in the back end, and notice that there was a route change and some new DNS that didn't seem to make sense based off of the previous access point that it was connected to. This is Zips doing its background checks. And again, that behavioral analysis that we mentioned in the slides before. As we continue our attack, I'm going to go ahead and drop out of that, and I'm going to get to work. So I'm going to fire up my browser. And again, this is last night, so I just wanted to show that we were definitely connected to the internet actively. Now, again, we're going back to our portal in this case. Actually, in this case, we may be going to check out our Disney, the Disney site, and maybe even go on a cruise out of Florida now that they're turned back on. So when I do that, my attacker has presented a pop-up, said, hey, and this could be anything crafted. In this case, it's just a, hey, put this app on and we'll give you a $30 Amazon card. No one's ever seen that before, I'm sure. The same things come over from SMS and what have you, but let's get started. So our user says, click here. It says, click here, sorry, user very dutifully does. And it says, listen, I just need to drop this APK, which is an Android app. I need to drop this on you so you can get your $30 card. And any sort of compelling event can be put in there to have the user take action. Now, the second that I do that, a couple things. Over here in our attack area, you'll see that it's waiting for Trojan installation, and it will get it, and then we'll get that C2 connection back as established to us. But again, the second that app was dropped, suspicious app detected. We'll see some information on that when we get to the console right after this. We'll continue with our attack. Next thing you know, I've installed main activity. So for those folks that do a little coding, that looks very familiar. For those that do penetration testing, that should look very familiar, especially if you're using the Metasploit framework. So each one of these activities or each one of these notifications that come down based off of policy, I'm monitor only, so I could make my demo attack progress. But each step of the way, by policy, we can say, take action X, and that action could be drop Wi-Fi or even disable Wi-Fi. And in this case, we're attached to an MDM, so that opens up other options like wiping the device, heaven forbid, etc. But we'll continue on with our attack. So once I've established my connection as a bad guy, I'm going to continue here. If I can make my slider move. There we go. Installing, and then I'm going to enable it. Now, remember, whenever you're exploiting a vulnerability, the whole point is to elevate your privileges and not have the user be exposed to any of this. This is the operating system doing what it needs to do. Everything that you see Zips do is going to come down from here. So just keep that in mind as you see this attack progress. So I've made my connection once I hit install, and you'll notice over here in my attack area that I have full Trojan installation, and I've got my reverse shell. Now, this is going to be GUI. Any hacker or attacker, I should say, worth their salt would never use a GUI, but that's beside the point. There's my suspicious app detected. Right after I loaded it, it was identified as well. And I move forward. From the attack perspective, I'm just going to go through here. I'm going to grab their call log, their SMS log, and what have you. Now, going back here, I want to show you some of the other options. Now, remember I said that I'm on monitor only, but in this case, I've given the option to the user to say, hey, you're in a bad state. I'm going to give you every opportunity that I can to take action. This app was detected. Do you want to install it? Gosh, no, I need that. I want my 30 bucks. It was side loaded. Are you sure this didn't come from an official app store or from the MDM's sanctioned store or anything? Absolutely not. I want my 30 bucks. And then finally, I'm in a condition that this particular device is no longer even close to being meeting my conditional access or anything like that. Now we're going to see conditional access in place here in the very next video, and then we'll jump into the console. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this portion of the video. And while I do that, right after that, let's go ahead and shut him down. I'm going to bring up my third attack. Now, this is our same individual and from the first video, but they're going to be in, let's say, using a GFE device in this case. Again, the only point that I want to point out here is that these folks are traveling. So on their way back to Algiers, they're heading back to DC, and they've landed in New York, and they're just going to take the train back to DC. So let's take a look at our friends here. I'll make this big. So this is our friend's device, and as you can see, in this case, it's an iPhone, but it is under, it is a GFE device in this case, and it's under the control of an MDM. In this case, that MDM happens to be Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager, as they've renamed it to. And there's a setting there called conditional access. And what conditional access means is that if the device falls out of an acceptable state, and it doesn't matter if it's our friend that downloaded, the malicious app, or they got the side-loaded profile, what we're going to do here is apply a policy that's going to be an active policy. In other words, we're going to take that the ability of the user to ignore anything. Now, this particular user is sitting in Grand Central Station, and this is going to be a conditional access portion of our demo. Now, I wanted to point out device attestation. Here, we click on the device safety. When we do that, what you're going to see is that this particular device does not have the latest and greatest iOS version. But that, in this case, is permissible, so we're going to continue with our event. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Outlook, and you'll notice that as luck would have it, I'm done for the day. That means that I'm not scheduled for anything. I'm just on my way home. Now, as I'm connected, as you can see up here, I've got a VPN established, but this is not an organizational VPN. This is actually a VPN that's within Zips, and it's a loopback VPN. So I can do things like look up phishing sites, both on device, but if I do need to take have that content or that URL looked at in the cloud, maybe it's the latest and greatest, I would want that VPN, that per app VPN, think of it as a loopback, so I can secure my lookup. Remember, if we're talking about a man in the middle or a person in the middle attack, they may have control over DNS, they may reroute me. This particular VPN, again, it's an app specific, it's not for the entire device. That's going to secure my DNS lookup. It's going to go through the tunnel. So as my attack progresses, I am connected to a local access point, and you'll see that here if I can get my dragger to. Okay, let's see, here we go. And we'll go to, I want to point out here that I'm connected to Z Wi-Fi 2, which is a legitimate, it's a legitimate access point. As we move through, you'll notice that my attacker has, brought up a couple of access points. One is the local Starbucks that's in the environment. We're just trying to increase our luck. The next one is going to be a Union Station free Wi-Fi. Now, I do want to just take a quick check because I did hear something. Am I still connected? I just want to hear, okay, I think I'm good to go. Very good. All right. So as we do that, we're going to connect to the Union Station Wi-Fi, which just happens to be a rogue Wi-Fi. The second we do that, you will see a couple things happen. One is that there's a notification that this is a captive portal, and then eventually we'll see it as a rogue Wi-Fi. Now, the user will not pay too much attention to that, though they do have the ability to take action. In fact, there's a recommendation that says, hey, if you're going to use this, it's in clear text, you may want to instantiate a VPN or some other tunneling mechanism. We'll continue. So the third alert that comes down is this is a rogue Wi-Fi. Now, we're not going to give the user the opportunity to take any sort of action in this case, but we do want to show you that this device is in a state on the network side, not necessarily the device side. We saw that earlier, but the network portion of this device is not in an acceptable state. So if you remember right before this, we connected to Outlook. We used Outlook and we were able to see that we were good to go for the rest of the day. So now that we've got a rogue access point connection, we'll try Outlook again. Well, look what happens. So in this case, Zips has reached out to Intune or MEM and said, my device is no longer in a condition that meets my policy. And then it told the MDM actually tells the device, it's conditional access. You're not in an appropriate condition to access this device, to access any data here. Now, well, okay, that's fine. And that's actually good to know. So as a very good user, in this case, I'll go ahead and get my slider going. I'm going to disconnect and get back to the Wi-Fi that I know that is safe. So I go from Union Station and I'm going to go back to my Z Wi-Fi 2, and then I'm going to get back to work. Let's see what happens whenever we instantiate Outlook. So we'll click on Outlook. Click on Outlook very slowly here. I'm just going to let it go because it's a little hard on the end part of the slider. So we click on Outlook and we're back in business. We have full access. Now, nothing was done on the user side other than ignoring a couple of alerts. But once they moved over to that Wi-Fi connection, that was a rogue Wi-Fi connection, we now have a device that is no longer acceptable. We moved back off of it. The device is acceptable and access is restored right there on the fly. All right, so for our use cases, as we went through there, our first use case, we looked at attacks like sideloading malicious profiles based off some phishing attacks. And the second one, we sideloaded an app based off of a rogue Wi-Fi. And then the third one, again, that was a rogue Wi-Fi, but that was also under the control of an MDM in this case, which helped us to take those actions. MTD, and as if you look at MTD as it's mapped along with a good quality MDM, you'll notice that it's a better together story. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close my videos, and I'm going to bring up my console, and we're going to take a look at some of those attacks. And then right after that, I think we've got exactly enough time to take care of our Q&A portion. Okay. So again, we'll make this nice and big and awesome looking so we can see. Now, this is just a visit to our console and some of the attacks that happened last night and a few this morning. So we'll start off with some phishing some phishing alerts. My friend here, this was off of the Android device, was presented with a link, and that particular link came up as a phishing protection. And in fact, I went to openfish.com, and I just grabbed one of the URLs off of that. To be specific, it was indixiumcorp.com. This could be something that was presented from the bank, from a man in the middle attack, person in the middle attack, or delivered by anything. So we get quite a bit of forensics capabilities there, what was going on the device, any nearby networks, and the network status. Network status gets fun because if there is any sort of a reverse shell that may be created in here, that could be identified here. The routing, we'll see that in another attack. We'll look for changes there, but it's very rich from a forensics perspective. Now, let's get to our the fun attack, the one I had the most fun with. We'll just call it what it was. And you'll notice that I got it by timestamp, so you can kind of see the progression of my attacks. I made a connection to the danger zone. Then it was identified as a rogue access point. Once that rogue access point, our user connected to it, you'll notice that it was a suspicious app that was downloaded. More to the point, that app was sideloaded. Once it was instantiated, it was able to do some system tampering. The device was compromised by a malicious application. Moreover, and it was done based off of a network-based attack. A couple other things to point out. You'll notice that these alerts are singular, and then there's these composite alerts. But let's take a look at some of the things that we're seeing here. We'll start off with the rogue access point. So the rogue access point gives us a whole bunch of different pieces of information, including geolocation. Remember, if I can identify where this device is, I can take action on that as well from a geolocation perspective. This happens to be where my office is. It's in a town called Battlefield, Missouri. And being good Missourians, we're right next to a town called Republic. It's just south of the town called Springfield, one of the 38 Springfields in the US. And no, not the one that Homer Simpson's in. That one's in Oregon. We could talk offline on that one. So another couple things is the process list of what's going on, nearby networks, and it looks like I'm not refreshing here, but the nearby networks, what I like to do is look in the network status. We'll let that repaint here. Come back over here, network status, there we go. So I got my rogue access point, any IP addresses that were around it, even my lat long as identified by the device itself. And then let's go back to that network status if it will paint for me. Oh, it's just not available. I didn't bring it off of there. So you get the idea around there. This access point happened to be Acme. And of course, I got the BSSID. That's going to be handy too, just from an administrative perspective, because if this was a legitimate device, I could actually whitelist that BSSID if I needed to. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing it in this case. Let's get into some of the meat. I want to show two more in here. One is the suspicious app, Android app, and the sideloaded portion of it. Let's look at the suspicious app. I get the information on it, including the app name, the event ID, there's the file hash that's available for you, and even the name and the path at the device level of where this app was dropped. So put your forensics hat on. We grab that the device from that user, and we can connect it and put our forensics, make a connection to our forensics infrastructure, and go pull that app off of the device and put it into IDA Pro or whatever our forensics toolkit is to take a look at that. All right, now those are the singular attacks. Let's look at one of these composite attacks, and this is the same one. So the same attack sequence. What I'm going to present here is the attack kill chain. In this case, there was system tampering done after the suspicious app was done. So if I wanted to look at the system tampering, I could find that information. the process list that was put in place and the current network status. And again, this is going to be right here in Battlefield. It's all the same activity there. Now, this could be New York, this could be Union Station, etc. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this portion of our demonstration, and we will open it up to Q&A. And I'm going to also stop my share.
Hey, Joe, appreciate all of that. Thank you. There were some questions, a couple of questions on the actual what steps in remediation. So I don't know if you can go back to the Z console and kind of show some of the remediation options within the console that can be performed.
Yeah, certainly.
And then as part of that, and while you're motioning over towards that, there was some question around, does it indicate why the app is suspicious? So obviously our tech reports do that, but is there anything in the console that kind of says, hey, why is this particular app suspicious? And where is that?
Certainly. Let me get reshared here.
And I think I'm trying to, folks, I'm trying to do my best on the chat side. So keep your questions coming. I'll get to them as best as I can.
All right. Again, just to reconfirm, you are seeing my screen.
Yes, check.
Okay. So the initial question was, what sort of mitigation strategies do we have here?
Yeah, remediation, like what happens and what can we do?
Yeah, certainly. So let's go into our policy area. And you'll notice that every one of my policies is based off of individual groups. I'm going to go to my public sector one. So I'm going to grab this one. And this is the policy that I was using. And it's based off of 63 detections. Each one of these detections can be a combination of static information, think signature based, be it hashes, be it libraries within the application that I'm pushing down. But there's also that dynamic behavior as well. So these would be the behavior analysis, call it machine learning. These are the algorithms that get pushed down, and that's how we make those determinations of what an app is it okay or not? Are the conditions that are created on the device based off of, again, both a static and a dynamic analysis, are they acceptable? So for instance, if an app makes connections to known C2 servers, or more to the point, in a 0-day case, let's say that it makes rights to unconditionally allocated memory space on the device. Start thinking heap smashing and buffer overflows, etc. With that, we'll just pick one kind of at random. Pseudo-random. It's got to be something that's going to be interesting for us. Let's look at some of these suspicious apps down here. So with this, just kind of taking a look at some of the things that we can do. And by the way, this particular one, all of our detections will be mapped directly to the MITRE attack matrix. Some of the activities that I can take. In this case, there's a number of alerts that I can create. Each one of these alerts but as you can see, I can make changes to them and present what I need to. From the Zips perspective itself, this is Zips making the detection, but it also has the ability to take additional actions. So the additional actions within Zips could be detect from, disconnect from Wi-Fi, depending on the application, the OS itself, tunnel that insecure traffic. Remember our connection to just unsecure wireless where there was no encryption on that. That's just going to be from a policy perspective. I can introduce network sinkholes. This is going to be handy whenever you apply these to various geolocations. And then lastly, you'll notice that there is a tight integration with Samsung Knox just within the device, within Zips itself. The next thing I want to do, and this is going to be from the perspective of, let's say we've got a Workspace ONE or any of our others, Microsoft Manager, Endpoint Manager. Let's just pick this one, for instance. So on that last one with conditional access, you'll notice that my actions over here, where it is under the control of an MDM, are presented. So for instance, in this case, this is just going to be presenting the information from zips back to, in this case, it would be intent. So what it's going to say is, here's the state, here's the alert. The alert's mapped over here to a severity. And then the actual MDM will come back and say, okay, this no longer meets conditional access, so you don't have access to these apps. Now, I'm also going to look at another one of our friends. I know there is a question. This is a non-exhaustive list of some of the MDMs, but let's take a look at our friends from Workspace ONE or Mobile Iron, whichever one I hit first. Yeah, let's look at Workspace ONE. So Workspace ONE, this is a policy that's going to be around compromised devices. And in this case, I may want to, as soon as it renders here, I may want to press a particular tag or say, I want to assign this device, if it hits a particular, let's use a little bit better one, a little bit better alert here. Go back down here to our friends. Let's say the rogue access point. Actually, let's go to a full suspicious profile. So in a suspicious profile, I want to mark this as a compromised device. And as a compromised device, I would push that back up to the MDM itself, in this case, Workspace ONE. It puts it in a group. Maybe it's in quarantine for remediation. Maybe that group is to be wiped or to have applications pulled out of the user space. So that's how we handle those kinds of things. Now,
hey, Joe, real quick, we're running out of time. So just to be clear, could you, is there anywhere in the console, just to answer Steve's question, where it kind of gives a little bit more explanation? So there's a ton of forensics that come along with the apps, but what sort of reveal that we offer in terms of why is the app suspicious from the very get-go?
So honestly, I don't have an answer for that right now. But I can tell you that whenever you do look at some of these, each one of these apps, you just hover over this eye for information on each one of these alerts. And it'll give you not only, it is a man in the middle attack or a person in the middle attack, but some of the conditions that that attack creates. So the ability for SSL stripping, to make HTTPS intercepts put in place. Let's take another look at our friend here at Pegasus Spyware. It's been on there. It's a surveillance tool to use to monitor any sort of activities. And then we'll come down here to the very bottom with some of the stage fright. Let's look at the stage fright vulnerability versus a suspicious app. Just a quick overview on it. And then finally is a suspicious iOS app. And again, notice that each one of these are mapped to the MITRE attack matrix. And any one of these can be clicked on and it takes you straight to the MITRE attack matrix. In particular, the mobile attack matrix and since this was around exfiltration, that portion of it, it gives you a full write-up of that, what's commonly used ports and et cetera, et cetera. Does that help?
It does. So I think when you hovered over it, that's probably what Steve was looking for, but we'll follow up with him if the more comprehensive answer. And then the last one before we absolutely run out of time in 3 minutes is Greg had the earlier question about validating the device to the identity. Greg, you still with us?
Yes, that's actually, so I can actually, for everybody and especially for Greg. So each one of and this is my list of devices and, the groups that they're associated with. Now we have this, what's not shown here, but I can talk to it, is you'll notice in some cases that I've got the same device like this one here and this one here. I just moved that same device over out of Workspace ONE and then just into a local device group. And in those cases, and this gives you kind of an idea of what it would look like. Now, it's the same exact device, but what happens if one person logs into it, then logs out of it, and then another person logs into it? Those devices will be the same device, and you would be able to see that in the information on the device, but it's given a different device ID because the device ID is matched based off of the user and the actual the device serial number, etc. Why is that important? It's because, and this is a use case that's really easy to knock out. Think of a shared Chromebook, for instance. In a shared Chromebook, you have one user log in, they take action. Let's say it's your high schooler and then your junior high person. I know this sounds like very specific. Your junior high person comes on board, logs into it, and whatever the high schooler did is now on the user in the in the junior highs area. So if if it's remediated with the junior high person, we have device attestation for them. The previous one gets updated because in the back end, it's the exact same device. So my high schooler, the events are still going to be there. The high schooler is still going to be in trouble. The junior high is going to have a good day. And that would be presented all up in our threat logs. I hope that helps with a little bit of time I had to go into that.
I think so. And Greg, obviously you can, reach out to us and we can talk through that in more detail, but we're at our time. I want to be respectful of that. 75 minutes. So appreciate everybody's time and attention. If you have questions, please surface them through Kirsten, and Kirsten knows how to get in touch with us. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you so much, everyone.